Welcome back to the channel, everyone! Today's story drops us onto the broken, forgotten Outpost 4 Beta, where a disgraced medic named Jace believes that even one small act of kindness can spark a revolution. And then he proves it when he chooses to heal a wounded monster who turns out to be the Vampire Queen, Nyx. As their bond grows through danger, dark politics, and propaganda, it's not brute strength that changes everything, but humanity. A joke that cracks open a moment of trust, the courage to stand between rage and mercy, and the decision to fight control with compassion and truth. The lesson is simple, but powerful. When the world tries to turn people into weapons or labels, choosing empathy and doing the right thing even when you're scared can rewrite the ending for everyone. They called me a disgraced doctor, a failure exiled to the galaxy's forgotten corner for a crime I never committed. Here on Outpost 4 Beta, every 40 seconds, the gravity generator hiccups, making your stomach jump and your coffee slosh. It's a constant reminder that you're in a place where even gravity is broken. I was just another forgotten man, patching up miners in a rundown clinic, but I believe that one small act of kindness, even in the darkest of places, can spark a revolution. Stick with me, and I'll tell you how a washed-up medic and a woman who bled starlight brought a corrupt empire to its knees. I was 40, but the lines on my face screamed 50. My clinic was a converted cargo bay, a testament to making do with nothing. It was filled with scavenged scanners, bootleg gauze, and a surgical table that had seen more action in the Unity Wars than I had. It wasn't much, but it was a place where the forgotten could find help. Just then, the doors hissed open, and a miner named Gorg staggered in, his hand wrapped in a dirty rag. "Don't tell me," I sighed. The hydro drill kicked back again. Gorg just grunted. "I swear, Doc," he said, plopping onto a stool, "that machine's got it in for me." "Machines don't have feelings, Gorg, just clumsy operators," I said, gently unwrapping the greasy rag. The wound was nasty, torn and smeared with lubricant. As I grabbed the antiseptic foam, Gorg started rambling. Sector gossip, rumors, anything to distract from the sting. "They say a ghost ship was spotted out in Sector 9, he whispered, his eyes wide. "A black cruiser, no transponder. The boys think it's the Shadow Fleet. The vampires." I just rolled my eyes, focusing on cleaning the gash with my steady, practiced hands. "There are no vampires out here, Gorg," I said, firing up the dermal knitter. "Just pirates, smugglers, and guys who don't know how to handle their tools," he hissed as the lasers stitched his skin together. "But the old stories, Doc. They say the Vampire Queen can walk in the vacuum of space." I slapped a synth skin patch over the sealed cut. "And I say you need to keep this dry for 24 hours, or you'll be dealing with something much nastier than a vampire." I sent him off with a stern look and a lollipop from the jar I kept for the station kids. Vampires. As if corrupt union bureaucrats weren't scary enough. Just as I was cleaning up, the station's proximity alarm blared to life. It wasn't the polite chime of a docking freighter. It was the raw, panicked scream of a collision alert. My half-finished coffee went flying as I grabbed my trauma kit. On a tiny outpost like this, an emergency call is for everyone. I slammed my mag boots onto the metal grating of the corridor and ran. The faulty gravity sputtered mid-stride, and for a split second, I was weightless. I crashed back down hard, but didn't break my pace. By the time I reached the hangar bay, the rescue crew was already scrambling. "What happened?" I yelled over the whine of the atmosphere cyclers. The hangar chief pointed a shaky finger toward the main viewport. "Something came in too hot. Clipped an asteroid. We're pulling it in now." The station's tractor beams groaned, straining to pull in a ship that seemed way too heavy for its size. An impossibly sleek ship, shaped like a shard of night, materialized in the hangar's containment field. Its hull seemed to drink the light, reflecting nothing. It hit the deck with a gut-wrenching shriek of tortured metal. "Get the jaws of life!" I commanded, rushing toward the wreckage. As the rescue drones tore open the cockpit, a strange, sweet-smelling smoke poured out, like ozone and dying flowers. I climbed onto the wing and peered inside. There was just one pilot, a woman slumped over the controls. I sliced through the harness with my laser scalpel. The moment she was free, I saw it. Her armor was alive, organic plates of chitin writhing as they tried to seal the deep gashes in her body. But it was her blood that made me freeze. It wasn't red. It was a thick, shimmering silver liquid that glowed with its own inner light, catching the hangar beams and splitting them into 1,000 tiny rainbows. "She's not breathing!" someone shouted. "Get out of my way!" I yelled, hauling her from the cockpit. She was impossibly heavy, dense like a dying star, but I threw her over my shoulder and sprinted back to the clinic, my spine screaming in protest. I cranked the clinic's temperature down to near freezing, hoping to slow the bleeding. The living armor peeled away from her skin with a sick, wet sound. She lay on my surgical table, a canvas of cuts and burns, her skin as pale as moonlight. My hands, usually rock-steady, trembled as I worked. "Just a man, patching up a wound," I whispered to myself, the words a flimsy shield against the sheer strangeness of it all. Her vitals were all wrong, a heartbeat of only 10 beats per minute, a body temperature that was clinically hypothermic. My scanner kept flashing unclassified species. As I worked on a deep cut across her ribs, a sudden chill filled the air. The shadows in the room seemed to stretch and deepen, reaching for the woman on the table. My breath plumed in the freezing air. "It's just the stress," I told myself, but my heart was hammering. Suddenly, the woman stirred, her head thrashing. A whisper escaped her bloodless lips, a phrase in a dead language I hadn't heard since my academy days. High Gothic. "Victus Eternox Solus Imperium." An old miner, Silas, who had stayed to help, dropped a tray of surgical tools with a deafening crash. "Doc, did you hear that?" Silas whispered, his face pale as a sheet. "Those are words from the Scourge Wars. My grandma told me stories. About the Nightwalkers. The vampires." He started backing away. "It's just delirium, Silas. She's in shock," I snapped, trying to convince myself as much as him. "No," he stammered. "That's what they chanted when they burned the colonies. That's a demon on your table." I pointed to the door. "Get out. Go drink until you forget you ever saw this." After Silas fled, I turned back to my patient. Her eyes snapped open, and they were solid crimson, glowing with an internal fire. A primal fear shot through me, an instinct screaming at me to run, but then the terrifying light in her eyes softened to a dull, pained glow, and she was just a wounded person again. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice a quiet authority. "Outpost 4 Beta," I said, my hands resuming their work. "You crashed." She looked at me, her gaze so intense it felt like she could see every mistake I'd ever made. "My name is Lyra," she said, a lie so smooth it was almost convincing. "Pirates attacked my ship." I couldn't help but let out a small, bitter laugh as I bandaged her arm. "Right. Pirates. Because they regularly hunt mercenaries in stealth ships that cost more than this entire station, who wear priceless living armor from a bygone era." She went rigid. "You know about armor." I met her gaze. "I was a Union field medic for 12 years. I know a lot of things." "There are things you learn that you wish you could just forget," Jace said quietly. "Look, I don't know who you are, and I honestly don't care. It makes no difference to me if you stole that ship or if every cop in the sector is after you. In this room, you are my patient. That's it." She just stared at him, utterly baffled. She seemed prepared for an interrogation, for torture, or even for being worshipped. She clearly had no idea how to handle simple, clumsy honesty. "I need to leave," she said sharply, swinging her legs over the side of the table. "You'll die if you try to stand up," Jace stated flatly. "I cannot stay here. If they find me—" She stopped, her gaze flicking nervously to the door. "Anyone who saw me, the crew that pulled me from the wreckage, they are liabilities." Jace froze solid. He slowly placed the laser scalpel back on its tray. "What was that you said?" "They saw the ship," she repeated, her voice becoming cold and pragmatic. "They saw me. If my pursuers track me down here, they will torture every last person to find out where I went. It's much cleaner to silence them now." Jace moved to stand between her and the door, crossing his arms over his chest. His uniform was smeared with her glowing blood. "Nobody is silencing anyone," he said, his voice firm. "Those men just saved your life." "They are already dead," she snapped back, a hint of something ancient and terrifying creeping into her voice. "You don't understand what is hunting me." "And I don't care," Jace replied. He pointed a finger at her, a gesture so hopelessly human against her powerful aura that it was almost funny. "You touch a single hair on their heads, and I will lock this entire clinic down. These blast doors are rated to survive orbital bombardment. You'll be stuck in here with me until the oxygen gives out." She stared at him, bewildered. "You would die to protect strangers?" "I would die to stop a murder from happening in my clinic," Jace corrected. "It's bad for business." She looked at him with a mix of confusion, frustration, and for the first time, uncertainty. She had anticipated fear. She had braced for greed. She had never expected a stubborn, tired man blocking her way with nothing but a bad attitude. Before she could form a reply, the entire station shuddered violently. This wasn't the usual gravity glitch. This was an impact. Jace grabbed the edge of a counter to steady himself. A siren began to shriek, a different sound from the collision alarm. This was the intrusion alert. "They're here," Lyra whispered. Jace checked the monitor on the wall. External cameras showed a ship attaching itself to the station, a sleek Predator-class frigate. It had no name, but painted on its hull in matte gray were two symbols, side by side: the Golden Eagle of the Galactic Union and a stylized, jagged drop of blood. "The Union?" Jace frowned. "And what is that?" "The Vampire Court," she said, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. "They're working together." The clinic's comm unit crackled to life. It was the station administrator, his voice trembling with fear. Jace, we have guests. They're asking for a crash survivor. They're heavily armed, Jace. They just shot Silas." All the blood drained from Jace's face. "Silas. He tried to run. They just cut him down." Lyra flinched. It was a small, involuntary twitch of her eye, but Jace caught it. She looked down at her hands, her expression twisting with a sudden, sharp guilt. "They are here because of me," she said softly. "Okay," Jace said. His voice was shaking, but he was already in motion, grabbing a stimulant injector and a portable medical scanner. "Okay, Plan B." "What is Plan B?" "We lie," Jace said. "We lie our asses off." He threw her a spare medical gown, a drab, shapeless thing made of green synthetic fiber. "Put this on. Cover up the markings on your skin." "Why are you helping me?" she asked, freezing in place. "I threatened to kill your friends." "And now the people chasing you actually killed one of them," Jace said grimly. "That makes you the lesser of two evils. Now put the damn gown on." The clinic doors hissed open before she was fully settled. 3 figures stepped inside. They were nightmares made of chrome and black leather. 2 were human operatives with dead eyes and pulse rifles held at the ready. The third was tall, painfully thin, and wore a high-collared coat and dark glasses. He moved with a liquid grace that made Jace's skin crawl. "Dr. Jace?" the tall one said. His voice was like oil sliding over velvet. "We are looking for a fugitive, a survivor of the crash." Jace stood directly in front of the surgical table, shielding Lyra from their view as best he could. He wiped his bloody hands on a rag, trying to look bored. "I have a lot of patience, buddy. You're going to have to be more specific, and you owe me for the door mechanism you just forced." The tall man stepped closer. He lowered his glasses, revealing putty yellow eyes. "Where is the pilot?" Jace gestured carelessly behind him. "You mean the burn victim? Picked her up an hour ago. Shuttle malfunction. He stepped aside. Lyra lay on the table, the green gown pulled up to her chin. She looked small, frail. The tall man leaned over her. He sniffed the air, frowning. "She smells wrong," the man said. "Infection," Jace lied smoothly. "Gamma rot. Highly contagious. That's why the room is so cold. I'm trying to freeze the bacteria. If you can get close enough to smell it, you're probably already breathing the spores." The two human operatives took a hasty step back. The tall creature hesitated. He leaned in closer to Lyra's face. Her eyes were closed, but Jace saw her hand tighten on the fabric of the gown, her muscles coiled. She was ready to strike. If she moved, if she revealed herself, the room would turn into a slaughterhouse. The tall man reached out a gloved hand to touch her cheek. Jace stepped forward, jamming the tip of the medical scanner right between the man's hand and Lyra's face. "Don't!" Jace snapped. "Unless you want your skin to slough off in sheets within the hour. I don't have enough quarantine beds for you three." The tall man paused. He looked at the scanner, which Jace had rigged to display a terrifyingly high biohazard reading. He looked at Jace's tired, annoyed face. Then he sneered, pulling his hand back. "Filth," he muttered. He turned to the operatives. "Search the rest of the station. If the target is not here, she is hiding in the tunnels. Burn it all if you have to." They turned and marched out. The tall man lingered for 1 second more, his yellow eyes boring into Jace before spinning on his heel and following them. The doors closed. For 10 seconds, neither Jace nor Lyra moved. Then Lyra let out a breath that sounded like a sob. Her legs gave out, and she slid off the table. Jace caught her. It was an instinctive reaction, the reflex of a medic. But the moment his arms went around her, the dynamic shifted. She was heavy against him, burning with a fever heat now instead of the cold. Her head fell onto his shoulder. Her armor had dissolved into her skin, leaving her in just the thin gown, and he could feel every tremor in her body. Lyra froze. Her face was pressed into the junction of his neck and shoulder. She could hear the thrum of his carotid artery. The sound was deafening to her enhanced senses. Thump, 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 thump! The smell of him, sweat, coffee, antiseptic, and the rich iron tang of living blood filled her nose. The hunger hit her like a physical blow. Her fangs ached to descend. It would be so easy. He was soft. He was right there. One bite, and she would have the strength to kill the assassins, the strength to heal, the strength to rule. She tensed, her fingers curling into claws against his back. Jace didn't pull away. He didn't cringe. Instead, he shifted his grip to support her better. He leaned his head forward until his forehead rested against hers. "Breathe," he whispered. "Just breathe. They are gone." The contact shocked her. It was not a grapple. It was not a prelude to violence. It was a gesture of profound, baffling intimacy. He was not afraid. Or rather, he was terrified. She could smell the cortisol spiking in his sweat. But he was choosing to hold her anyway. "Why?" she whispered, her voice trembling with the effort of not tearing his throat out. "I could kill you." "You will not," Jace said. His voice was steady, vibrating through her skull where they touched. "You are not a monster, Lyra. You are just a patient, and I have never lost a patient yet." The lie was kind. They both knew it was a lie. He had lost plenty of patients, and she was definitely a monster, but the kindness of it shattered her resolve. She sagged against him, the predatory tension draining away, leaving only exhaustion. For a moment, the legendary vampire queen, the scourge of the galaxy, simply let herself be held by a human man with coffee breath and shaking hands. "We have to go," Jace said, pulling back gently, though he kept his hands on her arms, stabilizing her. "Go where?" she asked, blinking. "They will figure it out," Jace said. "That guy, the tall one, he was not convinced. He is going to check the logs. He is going to realize gamma rot does not exist in this sector. They will be back in 10 minutes, and they will bring heavier weapons." "You must leave me," Lyra said, finding her footing. "Run. Take an escape pod and leave me to them." Jace shook his head. He began tearing off his bloodied lab coat, revealing a faded flight suit underneath. "Not happening. If you stay with me, you die," she said, her voice rising. "Do you not understand? I am hunted by the entire galaxy. There is no safety with me. There is only war." Jace stopped. He looked around his clinic. He looked at the flickering light panel, the coffee stain on the desk, the life he had built out of scrap and solitude to hide from his own memories of the war. He thought of Silas bleeding out on the docking bay floor because of a war he did not understand. "Silas is gone," Jace said, his voice barely a whisper. He looked right at Nyx. "I'm done running," he stated, "and I'm definitely done letting some thugs in leather jackets play God." He grabbed a duffel bag and began stuffing it with med packs, stims, and ration bars. "My ship's in Hangar 3. It's a total rust bucket. The hyperdrive leaks and the whole thing smells like a wet dog. But she's fast enough." Jace. Nyx used his name for the very first time. "Don't argue with your doctor," Jace said, zipping the bag shut. He slung it over his shoulder and offered her his hand. "Come on. This has officially become the worst house call of my entire career." Nyx stared at his hand. It was scarred, calloused, and open. She took it, and they ran. They bolted through the maintenance tunnels, completely avoiding the main corridors where the assassins were ripping the living quarters to shreds. Jace knew every loose grate and hidden ladder on this station. They burst into Hangar 3 just as the station-wide alarm blared from orange to a piercing red. "There she is!" Jace shouted, pointing at a battered, boxy ship that looked more like a flying brick than a starship. "The Hippocratic Oath." "It's hideous," Nyx said, even as she scrambled up the ramp right beside him. "She has character," Jace yelled back, punching the launch sequence into the keypad. The engines coughed, sputtered, and then roared to life. The clamps hissed open. As the ship lifted from the deck, Jace saw the hangar doors get blown wide open. The three assassins stood in the opening, firing pulse rounds that ricocheted harmlessly off the ship's hull. Jace gripped the yoke and slammed the throttle forward. The Hippocratic Oath shot out of the station's magnetic field, tumbling straight into a dense asteroid belt. "Hold on!" Jace screamed. He weaved through the field of debris with a wild skill that completely contradicted his earlier exhaustion, expertly spinning the ship between giant, tumbling rocks and clouds of ice. Behind them, the station shrank until it was just another speck of light in the endless black. They cleared the belt and hit open space. Jace slammed the lever for the hyperdrive. The stars stretched into impossibly long lines of light, and the ship lurched into the slipstream, leaving the outpost and Jace's quiet life far, far behind. A deep silence fell over the cockpit. Jace slumped back in the pilot's seat, feeling his heart rate finally drop back into the double digits. He glanced over at Nyx. She was just staring out the viewport at the swirling colors of hyperspace, her reflection in the glass looking like a ghost. "So?" Jace said, his voice cracking just a little. "Lyra, where exactly are we going?" Nyx turned to him, the burning red in her eyes having cooled to a deep, sad violet. "To the end of the world," she said softly, and then a little further. Jace sighed, rubbing his temples. "Great," he muttered. "I really hope they have coffee there." The inside of the Hippocratic Oath smelled of recycled air, ozone, and the ever-present, nutty scent of old coffee grounds. It was a smell Jace had lived with for 5 years, ever since he'd bought the decommissioned med-evac shuttle from a scrapyard on Titan. To him, it was the smell of home. To Nyx, however, it probably smelled like a prison. For the last 3 days, the two of them had been stuck inside the metal guts of the ship as it limped its way through the void between stars. The space was barely big enough for Jace by himself. With a 6-foot-tall alien warrior now sitting in the co-pilot's seat, the cabin felt microscopic. Jace kicked a pile of dirty clothes under his bunk and squeezed past the navigation console. A halogen protein bar crunched under his boot. He winced. Nyx didn't flinch. She sat with her back perfectly straight, her hands resting on her knees, just staring at the swirling hyperspace tunnel outside the viewport. She hadn't moved in 4 hours. She looked like a statue carved from obsidian and moonlight, completely out of place next to Jace's peeling dashboard stickers and patched-up pipes. "You know," Jace said, grabbing a roll of gray duct tape from a shelf, "you could blink every once in a while. It would make me feel less like I'm smuggling a mannequin across the galaxy." Nyx turned her head slowly. Her movement was unnervingly smooth, without any of the tiny, jerky motions of a human. "Conservation of energy," she said. Her voice was cool and distant. "And your ship vibrates at a frequency that suggests it's about to fall apart. I'm monitoring the hull for stress fractures." "The hull is fine," Jace mumbled, tearing off a piece of tape with his teeth. He slapped it over a hissing seal on the air recycler. "It just has personality. Not all of us can afford a silent, brooding stealth ship made of space magic." "It was biocrystalline armor," Nyx corrected him. "And it wasn't silent. It sang." "Right. It sang." Jace rolled his eyes and tossed the duct tape onto a stack of medical journals. "Well, down here in the cheap seats, we listen to the song of loose bolts." He watched her as he worked. She was tinkering with a small, intricate device she'd pulled from a piece of her ruined armor. It looked like some kind of compass made of bone and glowing circuits. She was adjusting its tiny dials with incredible precision, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Trying to call for a ride?" Jace asked. "I'm trying to find a route that won't get us vaporized," she replied. "The vampire trade lanes are shifting. The navigation buoys have been moved. The pattern is erratic." She set the device down and rubbed her temples. The gesture was so perfectly human, it caught Jace completely off guard. For just a second, the mask of the terrifying warrior slipped, revealing someone who was exhausted and utterly lost. "You look pale," Jace noted, stepping closer. "I mean, paler than usual." "I'm fine." "Your hands are shaking, Lyra." They are not, but they were. It was a tiny tremor, like a leaf shaking in the wind. Jace reached out to check her pulse, but she yanked her wrist away. "Don't touch me," she snapped. Jace held up his hands as if to surrender. "Okay, Touchy, I get it. Just trying to be your doctor." "I don't need a doctor," she said, turning back to the viewport. "I need silence." Jace sighed and backed away towards the galley. He brewed a fresh pot of what could barely be called coffee, watching her back. The tension in the ship was so thick you could cut it with a knife. It wasn't just the fear of being chased. It was the friction of two completely different beings forced together in a space the size of a closet. She was regal, precise, and a predator. He was messy, chaotic, and hopelessly human. He picked up a holo photo from the dashboard, a picture of his old squad, all of them smiling in front of a dropship before the disaster at Ridgeway. He wiped his thumb over the glass. "Hey, Your Highness," Jace called out, trying to cut through the heavy silence. "Want a ration bar? I've got synthetic strawberry or something called chocolate chalk." Nyx didn't answer. Instead, a low growl rumbled from deep in her throat, a sound so low it made the deck plates vibrate. Jace froze. That wasn't a stomach growl. That was the sound a predator makes right before it strikes. He looked at her reflection in the viewport glass. Her eyes were flickering. The solid crimson color was pulsing, getting brighter and then dimmer, like a warning light. She was gripping the armrests of her chair, so hard the metal was actually starting to bend. Jace frowned. He tapped the console, pulling up the encrypted news feeds he'd been pirating from the Union network. Maybe a distraction would help. "You might want to see this," he said, his playful tone completely gone. Nyx took a slow, deep breath, getting herself under control, and swiveled her chair around. "What is it?" Jace pointed to the main screen. The image was grainy, pulled from a stolen signal from the core worlds. It showed a city on fire. Skyscrapers were collapsing into a sea of flames, and hanging in the sky above the chaos was a massive silhouette, a ship shaped like a dagger. The text scrolling at the bottom of the screen read, "Vampire Queen Nyx Arathiel destroys colony on Jericho 7. Union declares total war. Total." Nyx went completely still. "Jericho 7, Jace read aloud. "The attack happened 6 hours ago." Nyx shot to her feet and moved toward the screen, her movements stiff and jerky. "Impossible." "Yeah, I'd say so," Jace agreed. "Since for the last 6 hours you've been passed out on my medical table, drooling on my good pillow. Unless you've got a twin sister or can be in 2 places at once. That's not you." Nyx stared at the screen. The camera zoomed in on a figure standing on the attacking ship. It was a woman in black bio-armor, pale-skinned with long, dark hair. She raised a hand, and purple lightning shot down, striking a hospital. "It's a phantom," Nyx whispered, hissing the word through her teeth. "An actor. A fake." She looked down at her own hands, her claws sliding out without her meaning them to. "They're using my face. They're using my name to murder innocent people." "But why?" Jace asked. "If the Union and the vampires are working together, why would they frame you?" "Because they need a monster," Nyx said. Her voice was trembling with a rage so cold it felt like the temperature in the cabin dropped by 10 degrees. "Peace is a hard sell, Jace. It takes compromise. But fear is easy. If the whole galaxy believes the Vampire Queen has gone insane, that she's a rabid dog that needs to be put down, they'll accept anything. They'll accept martial law. They'll accept a shadow fleet. They'll accept a new government that promises to save them from me." She turned away from the screen and started pacing the tiny cabin like a caged tiger. 3 steps, turn. 3 steps, turn. "Who are you really?" Jace asked quietly. Nyx stopped, her back to him. "I told you. I'm Lyra." Jace shook his head. "No, Lyra doesn't know the specific navigation buoys for the vampire trade lanes. Lyra doesn't speak High Gothic in her sleep. And Lyra doesn't look at a video of the Vampire Queen like someone just stole her identity." He took a step closer, crowding her space. "You're taking this personally, like they're wearing your clothes." He moved right up behind her. "You're not just some mercenary. You were one of her generals, weren't you? High command? Maybe even her personal guard." Nyx hesitated. The lie was right there, hanging in the air. She could tell him the truth. She could tell him she was that monster on the news, the architect of the same brutal war that had clearly broken him. But if she did, he would look at her the way the rest of the galaxy did, with pure, undiluted hatred. And for some strange reason, the thought of Jace hating her was something she couldn't bear. But she wasn't a monster who preyed on children. She lived by a code. And this was something else entirely. Jace studied her face for a long, hard second before nodding. "Okay, General. Let's go prove it." He settled back into the pilot's seat, his fingers flying across the nav computer. "There's a distress beacon," Jace said. "It's faint, coming from the edge of the Jericho system. A freighter called the Golden Hind. It was listed as destroyed in the first attack, but its transponder is still pinging." "If we go there, we're exposing ourselves," Nyx warned. "If we don't, we have nothing," Jace shot back. "And frankly, I'm sick of running in the dark. Let's go find out who's really behind all this." The Golden Hind was a tomb. It just drifted in the dead quiet of the nebula, its hull split open like a cracked eggshell. A halo of debris floated around it, cargo containers, frozen bits of atmosphere, and bodies. Jace parked their ship, the Hippocratic Oath, in the shadow of the wreckage, keeping their energy signature as low as possible. He and Nyx suited up, Jace in his beat-up, patched-together EVA suit, and Nyx with a spare breathing mask he'd rigged to fit her. She didn't need a full suit. Her skin was tough enough to handle the vacuum of space for a little while. They pushed off from the airlock, floating through the absolute silence toward the massive, jagged tear in the freighter's hull. Inside, the gravity was out, and there were floating bubbles of blood, bright red, human blood, just hanging in the air like tiny floating rubies. Watch your head. Jace's voice crackled over the comms, sounding tinny in her ear. Nix didn't reply. She was busy examining the walls. The scorch marks were specific. Plasma burns, she muttered. Focused, precise shots. This wasn't a wild rampage. Jace, looking at another wall, had to agree. This was a boarding party. They floated down the corridor toward the bridge. The internal camera logs were usually hardwired right into the main console. If the system survived the attack, it might hold the answers they were looking for. Jace got to work on the terminal, his fingers dancing over the keypad on his wrist. Got it. The main backup drive is totally fried, but the local cache is still here. Playing it now, he said. A holographic image flickered to life right above the console, showing the bridge of the Golden Hind just 3 days earlier. The crew was screaming as the blast doors melted into slag. Then, soldiers stormed in. Jace let out a sharp breath. The soldiers were wearing standard Union infantry armor, the same gray and blue gear Jace himself had worn for a decade. But their guns were all wrong. They were carrying these jagged, organic-looking rifles that shot bolts of crimson energy. Vampire tech, Jace whispered in disbelief. Union soldiers are using vampire weapons. Wait, Nix said. Look closer. She pointed at the man leading the charge. He took off his helmet. He was human. He turned, looked directly at the camera, and smiled before tossing a canister into the middle of the room. A cloud of purple gas exploded outward. The crew didn't just die. They started to change. Their veins turned a sickening black. Their eyes melted, and their bodies twisted into something feral and mindless. They became beasts that tore each other to pieces. A bioweapon, Jace said, feeling sick to his stomach. They turned them into ghouls, and they're going to pin it on the Queen's magic. Nix was trembling with rage. This was a complete violation. It was a cheap chemical copy of the sacred blood-turning ritual her people practiced. There, she said, pointing to the edge of the hologram. A handful of crew members had managed to avoid the gas. They'd run into a reinforced cargo locker. Jace immediately checked his scanner. Life signs. Faint, but they were there. They're still alive, he said, trapped in that locker, and their air is about to run out. They pushed off the walls, flying through the zero-gravity mess toward the cargo bay. The locker door was a massive slab of durasteel, but it was buckled from the explosion and melted shut. Jace locked his magnetic boots to the floor and tried the manual release. It was completely stuck. He pulled out a laser cutter. "It's too thick," he yelled. "The cutter will take 20 minutes, but they've only got about 5 minutes of air left." "Stand back," Nix commanded. She floated right in front of the door and placed her hands flat against the warped metal. She closed her eyes. Jace could only watch as the veins on her neck began to bulge. Her skin started to emit a faint, almost scary glow. And then, Nix pushed. She wasn't using leverage or hydraulics. This was pure, raw, supernatural strength. Her muscles tightened like steel cables as a guttural scream ripped from her throat, a sound of pure effort that vibrated through the entire ship. The durasteel door groaned, then shrieked with a sound like a thunderclap as the metal sheared. Nix ripped the 3-ton door right off its hinges and tossed it aside like it was made of cardboard. The air from the locker rushed out, but Jace was ready. He grabbed the terrified survivors, a family of Twi'lek refugees, and clipped their tethers to his suit. "I've got them!" Jace shouted. He looked back at Nix. She was just floating in the middle of the bay, completely limp. The glow was gone, and her eyes had rolled back in her head. "Nix!" He grabbed her tether and pulled her back toward their ship. A little later, on the Hippocratic Oath, things had calmed down. Jace had gotten the survivors settled in the cargo hold with blankets and oxygen masks. They were shaken up, but they were alive. He found Nix in the cockpit. She had collapsed onto the floor, her back against the co-pilot's chair. She was shaking uncontrollably, and her skin was a beam of translucent gray. The veins underneath looked black and starved. Jace dropped to his knees beside her and scanned her with his medical wand. The device just shrieked with errors. "System failure," Jace muttered, Metabolic collapse. Lyra, talk to me. What's happening? Is it the radiation? Nyx weakly shook her head, her teeth chattering. Not radiation, she gasped. Energy. Too much output. Reserves. Empty. She looked up at him, and Jace flinched. Her eyes weren't just red anymore. They were like black holes surrounded by rings of fire. Her fangs were fully extended, glistening. She looked less like a woman and more like a starving predator. I need, she whispered. What? Jace asked frantically. Glucose? Adrenaline? I've got a synthetic blood substitute. No. She knocked the medkit out of his hand, sending it clattering across the floor. Synthetics won't work. Not for this. I used the deep strength, she explained, curling into a ball and clutching her stomach. It requires life. Go away, Jace. Lock the door. If I don't feed, I'll lose control. I'll hunt. Jace froze. The reality of the situation hit him like a bucket of ice water. She was literally dying of hunger, and she was a vampire. He glanced at the door to the cargo hold, where the refugee family was huddled. If she lost control, she'd tear through that door like it was paper. She'd kill them all. He looked back at Nyx. She was shivering, trying to claw her way away from him, trying to protect him from herself. Jace let out a long breath. He'd made his choice. He rolled up the sleeve of his flight suit. Here, he said. Nyx's head snapped up. She stared at his bare forearm, at the blue vein pulsing just under the skin. Her nostrils flared. What are you doing? You need fuel, Jace said, his voice trembling just a little, but his arm held steady. I'm the only gas station around. You're human, she hissed. You're fragile. If I start, I might not be able to stop. I could drain you dry before I even know what I'm doing. You won't, Jace said, his voice firm. How do you know? Because you just ripped a steel door off its hinges to save total strangers, Jace said softly. Because you told me to run and save myself. You're not a monster, Lyra. You just have a dietary restriction. He moved his arm closer. My terms, he said. Or not at all. When I say stop, you stop. Stop. Yeah. Nyx just stared at his arm. The scent of his blood was completely overwhelming. It smelled like life, like salt, like the very heart of the stars. It was a siren song she had been fighting for days, and now he was just offering it to her. She reached out a hand. Her claws, sharp as scalpels, grazed his skin, but her touch was impossibly gentle as she pulled his arm toward her. Jace held his breath. She looked up at him one last time, her eyes wide, silently asking for permission. Do it, he whispered. She opened her mouth and struck. It wasn't painful. That was the craziest part. There was a sharp pinch, then a sudden rush of cold, followed by a wave of intense heat that shot up Jace's arm and exploded in his chest. It was pure euphoria. A chemical trick, he realized. A predator's way of keeping its prey calm. Jace's head fell back against the console. He gasped, his fingers digging into Nyx's shoulder. He could feel her drinking. He could feel the rhythmic pull as his life force left his body and flowed into hers. It was more intimate than anything he'd ever known. It was like they were merging. He felt her fear, her desperate relief. He felt the ancient, heavy power waking up inside her, stitching her cells back together. Nyx closed her eyes, lost in the taste of him. He tasted like ozone and pure stubbornness. He tasted like mercy. The hunger roared inside her, demanding more, demanding she take everything, that she crack the bone and drink the very marrow. Stop! A voice screamed in her mind. It's Jace! It's Jace! With a heroic effort of will, she let go. She pulled back, gasping for air, her mouth stained red. She licked her lips, catching a single stray drop. Jace slumped sideways, the whole world spinning around him. Nyx caught him before he could hit the floor. I've got you, she murmured, her voice suddenly rich and strong again. Jace blinked, trying to focus on her face. The sickly gray color was gone. She looked radiant, her skin glowing with a soft, pearly light. She was terrifyingly beautiful. "Wow," Jace slurred. "Okay, then that was something." He tried to sit up, but couldn't quite manage it.
Imagine being so powerless that someone can literally drink your blood for lunch, and all you can do is make a joke about it. That's where Jace was, his head spinning as the vampire queen, Nyx, held him close. "I think I took too much," she murmured, a hint of worry in her voice. He just gave her a weak, lopsided grin. Well, usually a guy buys a girl dinner before he lets her take a bite out of him. Nyx just stared, a drop of his blood still on her lip. And then, a sound escaped her that felt like ancient rust breaking apart. A genuine laugh. She tried to smother it, but it was too late. This single moment of humor between a human and his captor was the tiny spark that would eventually set the galaxy on fire, and you're not going to believe how it ends. It was a real musical laugh that melted her warrior's mask into something young and alive. "You're an idiot, Jace," she said, wiping her mouth on the back of her hand. "A complete and total idiot." "I prefer dedicated medical professional," Jace corrected, closing his eyes. An hour later, Jace was down 3 juice boxes and a pack of iron supplements. "They're going to sign the Treaty of Unification," Nyx realized aloud, her voice grim. "The treaty that makes the Shadow Fleet legal. The official surrender of human freedom in exchange for protection." Jace's voice turned grim too. "And the main event of the ceremony is an execution. They plan to execute the captured vampire queen." Nyx's eyes narrowed. Jace frowned. "Excuse me?" "This is vampire politics, Jace. It's a pit of vipers. If I walk onto that station, there's going to be blood. Oceans of it. You're a human medic with a busted ship. You're a liability." Jace stood up. "A liability? I just let you feed on me to stop you from eating the passengers." Nyx looked away, flustered. "It's a term for, the feeding. It creates a connection." "Look," Jace said, moving into her personal space again. He was learning she responded better to defiance than obedience. "I've seen the news reports, Nyx, or General, or whatever you are. I know what this new alliance does. They gas entire ship crews." "You need a wingman." "I don't need a human," Nyx snarled. "You need this human," Jace shot back. They glared at each other, the air crackling with the strange, volatile energy that had been building between them since the crash, a mix of gratitude, fury, and a magnetic pull neither of them wanted to admit to. Nyx looked at his stubborn jaw, his exhausted eyes, the bandage on his arm. "But if you die, Jace, I will never forgive you." A smile broke the tension on Jace's face. "Deal. Now get in the co-pilot's seat. We've got a galaxy to save, and my coffee's getting cold." The obsidian dagger didn't hum like a machine. It breathed. Jace sat on the edge of a slab that passed for a bunk in the captain's quarters, eyeing the wall suspiciously. "If this ship tries to digest me in my sleep," Jace muttered to the empty room, "I'm going to be seriously ticked off." He got up, his boots making a soft, squishing sound on the deck. They'd switched to this vessel 12 hours ago, finding it in a hidden orbital cache Nyx remembered from her days of conquest. Here, bathed in the bioluminescent glow of her own tech, she was terrifyingly majestic. The ship itself seemed to react to her. The lights grew brighter as she passed, and the air circulation kicked up, as if the vessel was glad to have her home. "We're crossing into the Tenebris sector," Nyx announced, her voice echoing perfectly in the room's acoustics. "We'll find a contact there who knows the summit's layout." She walked to a console that resembled a pedestal of black coral. Placing her hand on it, tendrils of light wrapped around her fingers, interfacing directly with her nervous system. "You need to understand what you're walking into, Jace," she said without looking at him. "You see, in their world, the system was brutal. At the top were the purebloods, The rich, the powerful, the ones with all the toys. Below them, soldiers bred for battle, then the common folk, and at the very bottom, the bloodless. As Nix once explained to him, they were the ones born without special gifts, doomed to be laborers and servants. It was order, she'd claimed, her eyes flashing with the memory of her iron-fisted rule. Before I united the houses, warlords burned entire systems for fun. I stopped the bleeding. Jace had called it what it was, slavery. Nix called it stability. But that stability was about to be shattered. I made examples of rebels, but I ended the chaos. Jace leaned against the warm, breathing wall and crossed his arms. You sound like a surgeon who cures a headache by cutting off the head, he said quietly. Nix stiffened. Don't you dare lecture me on governing, human. You lack the perspective of centuries. You see one life, I see an entire civilization. Said it was the only way to save the city in the long run. And did it? Nix challenged. We saved the city, Jace said. But there was no one left alive to celebrate. The necessary evil just kept growing until it devoured the whole reason we were fighting. He pushed off the wall and stepped closer. You built a throne on fear, Nix. And the second you showed a moment of weakness, the second you bled on my med bay table, all that fear vanished. She glanced down at her hand on the console. She remembered the child on that refugee world, the rock hitting her head. She remembered the terror in the eyes of the family she'd saved on the freighter. We can debate philosophy later, she said, her voice tight with tension. For now, we have a part to play. She reached into a storage panel and pulled out a heavy, ornate collar made of silver and onyx. You will walk 2 steps behind me. You will not speak unless I speak to you first. And you will keep your eyes on the ground. She held the collar out to him. Trust me, Jace. Jace let out a long sigh. He took the collar. It felt heavy, cold, and utterly humiliating. Fine, he said, clipping it around his neck. It clicked shut with a grim finality. They walked through a nightmare market on a forgotten moon, a place where you could buy vials of stolen emotions and blades that hummed with deadly energy. Nix moved like a phantom in a dark cloak, the crowd parting before her sheer menace, and 2 steps behind her, feeling utterly ridiculous, was Jace, attached to her by a silver chain clipped to a collar around his neck. He was her property, her pet, a disguise that felt sickeningly real. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and fear, filled with winged vampires and creatures with shark-like gills, all of them predators. Keep your head down, Nix's voice echoed directly in his mind, a neat trick of her armor. Don't make eye contact. Jace mumbled, Yes, mistress, his eyes fixed on the ground. Of course, trouble found them anyway. A group of hulking soldiers with cybernetic jaws blocked their path. One of them got right in Jace's face, sniffing the air. Well, look what we have here, the brute sneered, reaching a clawed hand toward Jace's cheek. A prime vintage. Without even slowing down, Nix flicked her wrist. The chain snapped tight, yanking Jace back as her other hand shot out and grabbed the soldier's wrist. She didn't crush it. She just pressed a single nerve, and the mountain of a man howled and dropped to his knees. He is not for touching, Nix's voice growled, distorted and chilling. He is a private reserve. The soldier, ready for a fight, looked up and saw the fake high-ranking sigil she flashed on her palm. All the fight drained out of him. Apologies, my lord, he stammered, scrambling away with his crew. Nice grip, Jace whispered, but Nix just tugged the chain sharply. Silence, pet. Then she did something surprising. She tangled her fingers in his hair, tilting his head back to expose his throat for all to see. It was a raw display of ownership, a warning to everyone watching. He could feel her cold breath on his skin as her thumb traced his jawline. He knew it was an act, but it sent an undeniable jolt of heat through him. You're playing this part a little too well, he whispered through clenched teeth. And you're blushing, she whispered back, her voice dripping with dark amusement. Focus, Jace. We're being watched. With that, she released him and swept toward a secluded booth hanging over a bottomless pit. Their contact was a spindly creature wrapped in bandages named Vex, a dealer of secrets. "The hooded one," Vex rasped. "You smell of old wars." Nyx cut right to the chase. "I need the agenda for the summit. I hear the Shadow Council is planning a spectacle." Vex's clawed fingers tapped the table. "Information is expensive. The price is fresh blood. From the pet." Jace's body went rigid, but Nyx didn't even blink. "He is not for consumption," she said, her voice like ice. "He is for my amusement." "I know who you are," Vex hissed, leaning forward. "The Queen lives." Nyx slowly lowered her hood. "Then you know what I'm capable of. Talk." And Vex did. The big reveal was worse than anything they could have imagined. The Council was planning to release Project Absolution, a nanite swarm tuned to specific genetic markers. It wasn't a weapon of war. It was a culling tool. "Explain," Nyx commanded. Vex slid a data shard across the table. "It targets the weak, the sick, the bloodless, and the humans. They're going to release it at the summit and blame it on you. They'll say you unleashed a plague as a final act of revenge." Nyx's hand clenched into a fist. "They're going to commit genocide and blame my ghost." Just as she said it, a laser bolt shattered the table, and Vex's head dissolved into blue mist. "Sniper!" Jace screamed, tackling Nyx to the floor just as a second shot sizzled through the air where she'd been sitting. The market erupted into pure chaos as assassins in the armor of Nyx's own former royal guard descended from the shadows. "They found us!" Nyx yelled, summoning shadows into solid whips that cracked through the air. "Get to the ship!" But Jace wasn't listening. A stray shot had hit a support beam, and a platform packed with civilians, human traders and bloodless workers, was starting to collapse. "We can't just leave!" he shouted. While Nyx became a whirlwind of death, Jace ran straight toward the danger. He slid under a wild brawl and reached the edge of the crumbling walkway just as a mother and her child were left dangling by one hand. Jace grabbed her wrist, his muscles screaming in protest as he hauled them to safety seconds before the platform plunged into the abyss. An assassin landed in front of him, grinning with sharp fangs. Jace didn't have a weapon. He had a medkit. He ripped a flashbang from his belt, pulled the pin, and tossed it at the vampire's feet. "Eat light, ugly!" The grenade went off in a blinding flash and a deafening boom. The dark-adapted assassin shrieked in agony. Jace kicked his knee, shattering the joint, then turned back to the terrified civilians. "Stay down. Cover your heads." He deployed a portable energy shield, protecting the huddled group from the crossfire. He wasn't fighting to kill. He was fighting to save. And across the battlefield, Nyx saw it. She was a brutal, efficient killing machine. But she paused, watching him. This human, this pet, was shielding the weak, protecting strangers at the risk of his own life. The other predators in the market, who usually treated violence as a spectator sport, had all stopped to stare at the human who fought with compassion. It was a kind of power they had never seen before. In that moment, something shifted inside the ancient queen. With a roar that shattered glass, she unleashed a massive telekinetic wave, slamming the last three assassins against a wall, not killing them, but pinning them. She had learned a new way. Together, they exposed the Council's horrific plan, and inspired by the human who refused to be a victim, the galaxy's forgotten people rose up. Nyx, with Jace as her equal, didn't rebuild her old empire of fear, but created a new one, founded on the simple, radical idea that true strength isn't about how many you can rule, but how many you are willing to protect. With the hum of the hyperdrive as their only companion, they put light years between themselves and the assassins. In the center of the ship's bridge, she stood, her eyes still glowing with the power of a queen. But now she was a queen on the run. The Council wanted her dead, and the man beside her, Jace, was the only person in the galaxy she could trust. "We're leaving," she'd told him, her voice like ice as they escaped the market. He'd grabbed the data shard from the lead assassin's body and never looked back. The crowd had parted for them, their fear mixed with a strange new wonder. They had watched a human and a monster walk away together. But who was the real monster? You're about to find out. The silence on the ship was heavy. Jace was in the medbay, tending to a nasty plasma burn on his arm. He winced as the dermal regenerator worked its magic. The door slid open, and Nyx walked in. She'd shed her cloak and armor, and in a simple tunic with her hair down, she looked smaller. She seemed to leave her royal authority at the door. She gently took the device from his hand. "Let me," she said softly. Her cool fingers were a relief on his skin as she worked without a word. Finally, she broke the silence. "You could have been killed," she murmured. "You stopped to save cattle." Jace looked up, tired. "They were people, Nyx." She shook her head. "To the rest of the galaxy, they're just numbers. To the Council, they are disposable." "And what about you?" Jace asked. Nyx froze, her gaze fixed on the burn mark. "I designed a world where they were nothing but numbers," she whispered. Vex was right. The Shadow Council, their whole plan. It's just the next step from what I started. I sacrificed the weak to make the whole stronger. I convinced myself it was mercy, that it was necessary. She looked up at Jace, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "A monster is someone who kills without a second thought. A monster is someone who can watch a mother hanging from a cliff and only see a statistic. That's not who you are. Not anymore." With his thumb, he wiped a silver tear from her cheek. "I saw you back at that market. You could have torn through every single person there to get to the assassins." Nyx stared at him, this delicate, impossibly stubborn human who had stepped into a pit of vipers and refused to become one. A wave of emotion, so intense it scared her more than her own hunger, crashed over her. It was gratitude, it was awe, and it was pure desire. She leaned into his touch, her hands finding his waist and pulling him closer. It was the collision of two entirely different worlds. Nyx tasted of cold starlight and ancient forgotten wine. She kissed him with a hunger that had nothing to do with sustenance, her fingers weaving into his hair as her body pressed him back against the examination table. Jace met her intensity, his hand sliding down her back, trying to anchor her, to hold her. Her chest heaved with ragged breaths. Her eyes flashed a dangerous red. "I can't," she whispered, a look of pure horror spreading across her face. Jace reached for her. "Nyx, it's all right." "No." She stumbled backward until she hit the wall. "I can smell your blood. My instincts. When I'm this close to you, when I want you this much. The predator inside me wakes up. I want to devour you, Jace." He wanted to go to her, to tell her he wasn't afraid. But he knew she was right. The line between her passion and her hunger was thinner than a razor's edge, and they were dancing right on it. He took a deliberate step back, giving her space. He held up his hands, palms open. "Okay," he said softly. "Okay. We stop." Nyx slid down the wall to the floor, hiding her face in her knees. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. He offered her a sad, crooked smile. "You stopped, Nyx. You stopped yourself. That's the real victory here." Nyx looked up at him and saw he was telling the truth. He wasn't scared of her. He was proud. She wiped her eyes, pulling herself together. The red glow faded from her irises, returning them to their deep, starry violet. "We have to go to the summit," she said, her voice becoming steady. "It's a suicide mission," Nyx stated flatly. Jace just shrugged. "I'm a medic. My job is to fight death every day. I'm used to long odds." He got to his feet and offered her a hand. "Come on, partner. Let's go save the universe." Nyx took his hand. This time her grip was firm and controlled. She let him pull her to her feet. They held on for just a second longer than they needed to. The word was written in bold galactic basic letters. Jace Callahan, Rogue Human Medic. Jace squinted to read the text below. Charges: conspiracy, terrorism, aiding a known enemy of the state. And then he saw the reward. Jace's eyes widened in disbelief. 5 million credits? He choked out. 5 million? That's more than the entire gross domestic product of my home planet. Great. Now every single bounty hunter from here to the galactic rim is going to be after me. I'm going to need a haircut or plastic surgery. Or, Nix said, striding past him toward the pilot's chair, her cloak swirling behind her. You could just stick close to the deadliest woman in the galaxy and hope she likes you enough to keep you alive. Next stop, the summit. The trip to the summit system was an exercise in suffocating tension. The Obsidian Dagger was a huge ship, built for a crew of 50, but the thick silence between Jace and Nix made the corridors feel as tight as a coffin. Paranoia had become their constant companion. They were running on fumes. They were scared out of their minds. And they were orbiting each other with a gravitational pull that was getting harder and harder to resist. You're pacing again, Jace noted, not bothering to look up from the ration pack he was trying to rehydrate. You're going to wear a trench in the deck plating, and since this ship is technically alive, that probably counts as assault. We're getting pretty good at running. Nix turned to face him. Her eyes were dark, sweeping over him with an intensity so possessive it made the hair on his arms stand on end. She crossed the space between them and adjusted the collar of his shirt, her fingers brushing against the pulse point in his neck. You're too slow to run, she murmured. If we get boarded, you stay behind me. You belong to me, and I don't lose what's mine. The air between them crackled. It felt like they were arguing, but it sounded more like a sacred vow. Before Jace could think of a reply, the navigation computer shrieked, "Blockade detected!" its voice a whisper in formal high Gothic. Nix spun around to the console. 3 Union destroyers, she reported. Arrestus, he repeated, the name tasting like ash. You know it. I served there, Jace said quietly. During the siege. It was bad. It's the only place we can hide until that blockade moves, Nix said. We can use the atmospheric interference to stay off their scanners. She started the landing sequence, and the ship banked sharply, diving toward the murky, gray-brown planet spinning below. They landed on a forgotten moon, choked by smog from factories recycling the galaxy's trash. Draped in heavy scavenger cloaks, they moved into the local settlement, a sprawling shantytown built in the shadow of fallen starships. This place, Nix whispered, taking in the mud and misery. It smells like old blood. Jace's voice was flat. It's a resettlement zone, for everyone displaced by the wars. Vampires, humans, any species that lost their home when the borders were redrawn. As they navigated the crowded, muddy streets, they saw people with hollow eyes, their bodies scarred by laser fire and starvation. Beggars held out sparking, twitching prosthetic hands. Nix kept her head down, but Jace could feel the tension radiating from her. She was walking through the consequences of her own history. Every destroyed home, every starving orphan, was a direct result of her reign. They passed a group of grizzled veterans huddled around a barrel of chemical fire. One of them, a human with a face half melted into scar tissue, spat on the ground. Saw the black ships block out the sun, the man growled, talking about the Queen's banner. Didn't even bother to hail us, just opened fire. My wife, she never even made it to the shelter. Nix froze, every muscle in her body going rigid. Jace grabbed her arm. Keep moving, he hissed. But Nix was staring at a little girl with blue skin and huge dark eyes peeking out from a doorway. The child was clutching a sharp piece of broken concrete. As their eyes met, the hood of Nix's cloak slipped back just enough to reveal the pale skin of her cheek and the violet royal tattoo near her ear. The child's eyes went wide with recognition. Every kid in the galaxy knew that mark. It was the mark of the monster. Monster! The little girl shrieked. Before Jace could even move, the child threw the jagged rock. It was a weak, clumsy toss. Nix could have caught it. She could have deflected it with a single thought. She could have turned the stone to dust before it traveled 2 feet. But she did nothing. She stood perfectly still and let the rock strike her on the temple. The impact made a sickening wet crack. A line of shimmering, starlight-colored blood trickled down her pale face. The entire street fell silent. The veterans by the fire scrambled to their feet, grabbing makeshift clubs and pipes. Jace instantly stepped in front of Nyx, shielding her. "Get back!" he yelled at the growing crowd. "That's the Butcher Queen!" the scarred veteran screamed. "We have to go, now!" Jace urged, grabbing Nyx's shoulder. She finally looked at him, her eyes empty of anger, filled only with a deep, crushing sorrow. "I deserve it," she whispered. "Move!" Jace shoved her into a dark alleyway just as a glass bottle shattered against the wall where she'd been standing. They scrambled through a maze of shacks, the mob's angry shouts fading behind them. Jace found a hidden alcove under a collapsed bridge and pushed Nyx down onto a crate. "Let me see," he commanded, pulling a med scanner from his belt. His hands were shaking, but his training took over. He pushed back her hood. The cut was deep and jagged. "Why?" Jace asked, spraying antiseptic foam on the wound. "Why didn't you stop it?" "Because that child was right," Nyx said, staring blankly into the darkness. "I took her parents. I destroyed her world. A stone is a small price to pay for that." Jace gently applied a butterfly stitch to close the wound. "You can't pay for a genocide one rock at a time, Nyx." He sighed, a sad, humorless smile on his face. "I'm just a human man, treating wounds. Nothing more." Nyx looked at him then, her gaze softening. She reached up and placed her hand over his, pressing his palm to her cheek. "You," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "are the only thing standing between me and the dark." The moment was shattered by the sound of sirens wailing overhead. Jace peered through the gaps in the bridge. He saw dropships descending, sleek white vessels marked with the red cross of the Union Medical Corps. "Inspectors," Jace said with relief. "Humanitarian aid." Nyx sniffed the air, her eyes narrowing. "No, the smell of ozone is too sharp. Those ships are carrying pulse cannons. They're not here to help the refugees." Her voice dropped to a deadly whisper. "They're here for us." The mission was a bloody nightmare. The so-called inspectors were elite council enforcers. They stormed the camp, kicking in doors and dragging people into the mud. They were hunting for a human medic and a vampire woman. Jace and Nyx moved like ghosts through the chaos, but they couldn't just run. The enforcers were herding the refugees into containment pens. "They're going to kill them all," Jace realized in horror, watching from a rooftop. "They're erasing the witnesses." Nyx stood beside him, her hand already on the hilt of her sword. "We can't save all of them," she said grimly. Jace's face was set with determination. "We have to try. The med shuttles are on the landing pad. If we can hijack one, we can get the families out." "It's a trap, Jace." "I know. Are you with me?" Nyx looked into his determined eyes and nodded. "Always." They split up. Jace headed for the landing pad, hacking the camp's PA system to blast a high-frequency squeal that scrambled the enforcers' communications. While he created a distraction, Nyx moved through the shadows like a whisper of death. One by one, enforcers vanished into dark alleys, silenced before they could even scream. Jace reached the shuttles and began hot-wiring the first one. "Get on board!" he shouted to a terrified family. "Go!" The first shuttle lifted off, followed by a second. But as the third one powered up, the trap sprang shut. A heavy assault walker stomped into view, its rotary cannon spinning to life. Behind it, a platoon of soldiers took aim. They had him pinned. "Surrender! Target!" A voice boomed from a loudspeaker. Jace dove behind a fuel crate as laser fire ripped apart the concrete around him. He was trapped. He was dead. And then, the sky went black. It wasn't clouds. It was Nyx. She dropped from a crane high above, landing right in the middle of the soldiers. But this wasn't the wounded woman from the alley. This was the Queen of the Night. She threw her arms wide, and massive tattered wings made of pure shadow erupted from her back, swirling around her and deflecting the storm of bullets. Nyx let out a scream that wasn't human, a sound so powerful it shattered the glass in the control tower. With a flick of her wrist, she unleashed a wave of force. The assault walker, 20 tons of armored steel, was lifted into the air and crushed like a soda can.
She hurled the wreckage into the platoon of soldiers. Peeking over the crate, Jace watched with his mouth hanging open. A cold, primal fear shot down his spine. This was the monster from the legends, the creature mothers used to frighten their children. She was magnificent, and she was absolutely terrifying. A halo of crimson light ignited around her head as she moved faster than the eye could see, a blur of claws and shadow. She tore through the remaining soldiers, not just killing them, but completely unmaking them. The last few soldiers threw down their weapons. "We surrender!" one screamed in terror. Nyx didn't even slow down. She lunged at the surrendering man, her eyes burning white-hot, her hand raised to rip his heart out. She was completely lost in the fury. "Nyx!" Jace screamed, scrambling over the crate and sprinting into the middle of the carnage. She couldn't hear him. Her claws were inches from the soldier's throat. Without a second thought, Jace tackled her, wrapping his arms around her waist and slamming her against the shuttle's landing strut. "Nyx, look at me!" she snarled, thrashing in his arms with enough strength to break him in two. She raised a hand to strike him down, her claws dripping with blood. Jace grabbed her wrist. He pressed his other hand, bleeding from a graze on his own arm, flat against the center of her chest, right over her still, unbeating heart. "It's Jace!" he yelled, his voice cutting through the bloodlust. "Nyx, it's me!" The scent of his blood, so close and so warm, was an intoxicating drug. But instead of triggering her hunger, the feel of his heart hammering against her ribs, the sound of him shouting her name, it pierced through the red haze of her rage. She froze, her body going rigid. Her glowing eyes flickered. The white-hot fury receded, replaced first by a wave of confusion and then by sickening horror. She looked down at the terrified soldier cowering on the floor, then at Jace, his face just inches from hers, his expression a mixture of raw fearlessness and pure desperation. "Jace," she breathed, her voice a ghost of a whisper. "I'm right here," he said, completely out of breath. "Come back to me. You're safe. You don't have to kill them." Nyx sagged against him, the terrible shadow seeming to retreat back into her skin. She was shaking like a leaf. "I almost—" she gasped, her voice choked with horror. "I know," Jace said gently, "but you didn't." He carefully guided her toward the ship's ramp. "We're leaving. Now." The argument that erupted aboard their ship was probably the loudest sound it had ever contained. "You can't do that!" Jace shouted, pacing the floor of the med bay while Nyx frantically scrubbed the blood from her hands. "You can't just flip off your morality switch because you get angry." "They were killing my people!" Nyx yelled back, whirling around to face him. A spray of bloody water flew from her hands. "They were slaughtering innocents. Sometimes to stop the monsters, you have to become one yourself. It's the only language they understand, Jace." "That's the language that set the galaxy on fire," Jace roared back. "If you save the universe by becoming the same terror they are, then you haven't saved a single thing. You've just put it under new management." Nyx stalked toward him, her movements predatory, backing him up against a counter. "You want me to be gentle? You want me to play the saint? I'm a vampire, Jace. A predator. This thing is inside me. It's who I am. You look at me and see a woman, but I am death itself, and I'm so tired of pretending I'm not." But Jace didn't back down. He held his ground, their chests heaving with emotion. "I don't see a woman," he said, his voice dropping to a fierce, low whisper. "And I don't see a monster. I see you. I see the person who took a rock to the face just to settle a debt."
I see the person who saved that family down in the cargo hold. He reached out, grabbing her shoulders, his grip almost bruising in its intensity. I see you, Nix. All of you. The blood, the rage, the guilt. I see all of it. And I'm not flinching. Nix just stared at him, her anger dissolving in an instant, leaving her feeling raw and completely exposed. Why? She whispered. Why don't you run? Because, Jace said, his own voice cracking with emotion. Because I'm an idiot who fell in love with a walking headache. The silence that fell between them was thick and electric. Nix let out a strange sound, something halfway between a "seh" and a laugh. She stepped forward, burying her face in the crook of his neck. You're a fool, she murmured against his skin, wrapping her arms around him and holding on with a desperation that was almost painful. Jace held her right back, his hands tangling in her damp hair. They stood like that for what felt like an eternity, the adrenaline finally giving way to bone-deep exhaustion. When they finally pulled apart, the air was heavy with all the things they hadn't done, the kiss they hadn't finished, the line they were both terrified to cross. We can't, Nix said softly, seeing the question in his eyes. I know, Jace replied. If we do this, if we cross that line right now, it becomes a weakness, Nix finished for him. The enemy will use it, and I'm not stable enough. If I take you to bed, Jace, I'm afraid I might actually break you. Jace managed a weak smile. Hey, I'm tougher than I look. I survived your cooking last night, didn't I? Nix let out a wet, shaky laugh. She gently touched the bandage on his arm where one of the blasts had grazed him. Your skin is so soft, she said, a sense of wonder in her voice. It tears so easily. And yet you keep throwing yourself in front of bullets for me. It's a bad habit, Jace admitted. He walked over to the console and pulled a small data chip from his pocket. While you were busy rewriting the laws of physics back there, I managed to get a recording of the inspectors. I got footage of them rounding up the refugees. I got audio of their orders coming straight from the council. He slotted the chip into the transmitter. I'm uploading it now. To the underground networks. Every pirate station, every news outlet, every independent server I can find. By morning, the entire galaxy will know the Union is purging refugee camps. It'll shatter the Council's narrative, Nix said, nodding in approval. They want to paint themselves as saviors, she continued. This shows them for the butchers they really are. It buys us time, Jace said, but we still need a way to get into that summit. Just then, the ship's comms console beeped, signaling a priority channel request. Nix frowned. That's a private frequency. Only 3 people in the universe have that code, and 2 of them are dead. She opened the channel. A holographic face flickered to life. It was a man, strikingly handsome, with silver hair and eyes that looked like molten gold. He wore the high, stiff collar of a vampire duke. Nix, the man said, his voice as smooth as silk. You look terrible, my dear. Still wearing that dreadful bio-armor, I see. Valerius? Nix said, her voice instantly turning to ice. Is that the boyfriend? Jace asked, leaning into the hologram's frame. He looks like a chandelier. Valerius glanced at Jace with an expression of amused distaste. And you must be the pet. The little human medic. The bounty on your head is quite impressive, little one. What do you want, Valerius? Nix snapped. I want to help you, Valerius purred. I saw your little data upload. The refugee camp. So crude. The Shadow Council lacks any kind of finesse. I happen to have a shuttle with clearance for the summit. I can get you inside the perimeter. Why would you help me? You tried to have me assassinated twice during the Second Era. Old habits, Valerius dismissed with a lazy wave of his hand. But this new regime, it's so boring, Nix. All bureaucrats and generals. No style. I prefer the devil I know. He sent a set of coordinates. Meet me at the Azure Nebula. I'll take you the rest of the way, and don't keep me waiting. The transmission cut out. He's lying, Jace said immediately. Probably, Nix agreed. But he's also vain, arrogant, and absolutely hates being told what to do. If the council is ordering him around, he might genuinely want to rebel just to spite them. And he called you my dear, Jace grumbled under his breath. Nix smirked. Are you jealous of the disco ball with fangs? No, maybe. Yes. Nix patted his cheek affectionately. He was my consort for a decade. It meant nothing. He's incapable of love. The only thing he loves is a mirror. But we need the ride. Jace sighed heavily. All right, let's go meet the disco ball. The rendezvous at the Azure Nebula went smoothly. A little too smoothly. Valerius's yacht was a masterpiece of obscene luxury, gold plating, velvet seats, and artificial gravity that made it feel like you were floating on a cloud. He greeted Nix with a kiss on her hand that lasted about 3 seconds too long, while Jace stood beside her, gripping his med kit like it was a weapon. You've aged well, Nix, Valerius purred, pouring them drinks. The rugged look suits you, and the human, he has a certain rustic charm, like a stray dog one finds in an alley. I bite, Jace muttered. Valerius just laughed. I'm sure you do. They traveled toward the summit coordinates in a thick, palpable tension. Valerius spent the entire journey telling stories about old battles he and Nix had fought together, pointedly leaving Jace out of every single conversation. He would touch Nix's arm, laugh at inside jokes, and generally act like a man trying to stake a claim. Jace stewed in silence, just watching the stars blur past the viewport. He felt small. He felt temporary. But he noticed Nix kept glancing over at him. She kept subtly shifting away from Valerius, inching closer to where Jace was sitting. We're approaching the security perimeter, Valerius finally announced. I'll need you both to wait in the cargo hold. The scanners are sensitive. They'll pick up your biosignatures on the bridge. Fine, Nix said. She grabbed Jace's hand and pulled him toward the hold. Watch your back, Jace whispered as the door began to slide shut. The cargo hold was just as lavish as the rest of the ship, filled with priceless art and crates of rare wine. But as the door hissed closed, there was a heavy metallic thunk of magnetic locks engaging. Jace frowned. That didn't sound like a privacy lock. He tried the control panel. It was completely dead. We're locked in, he said, turning to Nix. Nix spun around. Valerius, open this door! The ship's intercom crackled to life. I am sorry, my dear, Valerius's voice echoed, and he sounded genuinely regretful. But the council made me an offer I simply couldn't refuse. A seat at the high table, and governorship of the Pleiades sector. You traitorous snake, Nix screamed, pounding her fists against the solid metal door. You're always going to lose, Nix, Valerius sighed. The era of queens is over. But don't you worry. I negotiated for your life. You'll simply be imprisoned, not executed. We'll have an eternity to catch up. The entire ship shuddered as it docked with a much larger vessel, a council cruiser. They're boarding, Jace said, his eyes darting around the room frantically. A vent! There's a maintenance vent up there. He pointed to a small grate near the ceiling. In a flash, Nix was there, ripping the grate from the wall. Go! She ordered him. You go, Jace shot back. You can fit. I'll hold them off at the door. Jace, if they catch you, it's over, Jace yelled, cutting her off. If they catch me, I'm just a hostage. If they catch you, the resistance is finished. Now go. The main door began to glow a bright orange in the center as they started cutting through it. Nix looked at Jace, then at the vent. She knew he was right. I will come back for you, she vowed, her voice filled with deadly promise. I swear it. Go! Jace yelled again. Nix leaped into the vent and vanished into the guts of the ship just as the cargo door exploded inward. Smoke and shrapnel filled the room. Soldiers in heavy armor poured in, their weapons raised and ready. Jace stood alone in the center of the room, his hands held high in surrender. Valerius strolled in behind the soldiers, holding a silk handkerchief to his nose to ward off the smoke. "Where is she?" Valerius demanded, his eyes scanning the empty room. Jace smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous smile, the kind he had learned from Nyx. "She's gone," Jace said, his voice calm and steady. "And you are going to seriously regret not checking the vents." Valerius's handsome face twisted into a mask of pure fury. "Take him," he ordered the soldiers. "The council will want to question the pet." The soldiers grabbed Jace, dragging him away. Jace didn't struggle. He just kept smiling, because he knew that somewhere in the walls of that ship, a monster was now loose, and she was pissed. Nyx was nowhere near the walls. She was back on the obsidian dagger, her ship cloaked and latched onto Valeri's yacht like a shadow. From the pilot's seat, she watched the council cruiser undock and warp away, stealing Jace from her. An absolute, crushing silence filled the cockpit. Her gaze fell on the empty co-pilot's chair, then to the half-finished mug of coffee he'd left on the console. A searing pain ripped through her chest, sharper than any blade she'd ever wielded. They had him. They had her anchor, the only person who had ever looked at her and seen a person instead of a monster. Nyx rose from her seat. She strode to the armory and began to methodically strap on the heavy, black-plated armor of a war queen, slotting jagged blades into her gauntlets. She ran a systems check, calibrating the ship's weapons. Her eyes, once violet, then red, were now just voids of pure, bottomless darkness. She was terrified. Her heart was shattered. But simmering beneath it all was a cold fury she hadn't felt in 1,000 years. "They took my human," she growled, her voice a low, vibrating hum. "Set a course for the summit. Override all safety protocols. Charge the main cannons." The ship's AI whispered back. "Destination confirmed." "Objective?" Nyx stared out at the star-dusted void. "Burn it all down," she commanded. The world was sterile white and smelled of ozone. Jace Callahan woke to the steady, rhythmic beep of a cardiac monitor. He tried to lift his arms, but they were leaden, strapped to a metal table that felt disturbingly familiar to the one in his own med clinic. Wires snaked from his chest, his temples, and, most unnervingly, from the crook of his arm, right where Nyx had bitten him. "Fascinating," a detached voice echoed from somewhere above. "The subject is showing elevated dopamine levels, despite the significant stress factors. The bond appears to be chemically resilient." Jace blinked, his vision slowly focusing. He was in a circular laboratory enclosed by glass walls. Outside the glass, figures in pristine white coats moved about with the cold efficiency of butchers. He tilted his head and saw a young technician, who couldn't have been more than 20, adjusting a drip feed beside him. The kid's hands were trembling. "Hey," Jace croaked, his throat feeling like he'd swallowed a handful of sand. "If you're going to exsanguinate me, could you at least warm the needle first? It's just common courtesy." The technician flinched, almost fumbling his datapad. You're awake." "That I am," Jace confirmed. "And I'm guessing this isn't the VIP lounge at the Summit Hotel." The lead scientist strode into view. He was a Union xenobiologist Jace recognized from academic journals, Dr. Eris Thorne, a man who'd famously written papers on the ethics of interspecies medicine and was now apparently using them as coasters. "Mr. Callahan," Thorne said, his eyes fixed on a holographic display of Jace's blood work. "You are a truly fascinating specimen. The Queen's saliva hasn't just healed you, it's actively rewriting portions of your genetic code. You've become a living battery for vampiric energy." Jace strained against the restraints. They were solid durasteel. "So I'm a juice box," Jace said flatly. "Is that the plan? You capture the Queen and keep me around for a quick snack?" "Oh no," Thorne said with a chillingly cold smile. "We don't need you for feeding. We need the template. If we can synthesize the unique compound in your blood that creates this subservient bond, We can mass-produce a serum. We can make every single vampire in the galaxy as docile as a house cat. We won't just win the war, Mr. Callahan. We will own the enemy." A cold dread washed over Jace that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. They wanted to enslave an entire species. "Seems like a lot of work," Jace said, forcing a light tone. "Usually you just buy a guy a drink to get him on your side." Thorn paid him no mind. "Prepare the extraction centrifuge. We'll need 2 liters of marrow." 2 liters. Jace did the quick, grim calculation. That was a fatal dose. Thorn turned to leave, but the young technician hesitated. He glanced at Jace, then quickly looked away at the floor. "Kid," Jace whispered. The technician looked up. His name tag read Ren. "Ren," Jace said, his voice soft. "You know this is wrong. You took an oath. Or at least you signed a contract that probably had a fine print clause about not grinding people into a fine paste." I just follow orders," Ren stammered. "That's what they all said at the Nuremberg trials," Jace shot back. "Look at my chart, Ren. See those jagged spikes in the neural activity? That isn't subservience. That's terror. I'm scared out of my mind." Ren's eyes darted to the monitor, seeing the frantic, chaotic rhythm of a human heart pushed to its absolute limit. "I can't help you," Ren hissed. "The door is bio-locked." "I don't need you to open the door," Jace said. "I just need you to be clumsy. That sedative drip, if you were to accidentally crank it up to a lethal dose, the system would trigger a crash cart response, right? It would automatically unlock my restraints for resuscitation." Ren's eyes widened in horror. "But that would stop your heart." Jace managed a weak grin, though beads of sweat dotted his forehead. "I'm a medic. I know exactly how long I can play dead before it becomes permanent." "Do it. Be a hero, Ren. Or be a butcher. Time to pick a side." Miles above the detention block, in the grand spire of the summit station, Nyx walked in chains. They weren't real chains, but ceremonial bonds of gold and light draped over her wrists and ankles. She was dressed in a gown of heavy black velvet that seemed to drink the light, a stark, damning contrast to the gleaming white uniforms of the Union admirals and the silver finery of the vampire high lords. She kept her head bowed, playing the part of the defeated queen perfectly. The entire summit hall was a cathedral built on lies. Its ceiling was a transparent dome showcasing the majestic swirl of a nearby nebula, while the floor below was polished to a mirror shine from black obsidian. Thousands of delegates, corporate moguls, planetary governors, and military chiefs filled the tiered rows. They all stared at her with a greedy, triumphant hunger. The monster was finally on a leash. The nightmare was over. Nyx's face was a mask of calm, but under her skin, her blood was a boiling inferno. She could feel the obsidian dagger, her ship, hovering in stealth mode just beyond the station's shields, awaiting her command. But she couldn't give the signal. Not yet. Not until she knew where they were holding Jace. She was led to a raised platform in the very center of the vast chamber. The Shadow Council was seated there, the 5 individuals who truly held the galaxy's leash. General Kael of the Union and Lord Malachor of the vampire aristocracy sat shoulder to shoulder. "Behold!" Lord Malachor's voice boomed, amplified to reach every corner of the hall. "The architect of our suffering, the Queen of Ruin." The crowd erupted in a thunderous roar. Nyx didn't even flinch. Kael then stood. "Today, we do not merely celebrate peace. We ensure it. We have created a defense network, a biological shield that will protect our worlds from the chaos of the past." He gestured to a massive holographic screen that materialized above the dais. "But first, let us see the truth behind the Queen's so-called resistance." The screen flickered on. Nyx looked up, and her heart felt like it stopped. It was footage from the outpost, of Jace tending to her wounds, but the audio had been twisted. Jace's words of genuine concern had been edited to sound like groveling, obsessive worship. The lighting was altered to make her look demonic, her eyes glowing with a sinister, unnatural light. "He is mine," the doctored audio of her voice hissed across the hall. "A thrall to do my bidding." The scene then cut to Jace in the detention lab, looking pale and broken, hooked up to their machines. "This human," Kyle narrated, "fell under her spell. He betrayed his own kind. He is a victim of her insidious mind control. And today, we will grant him the only mercy he has left." The image on the screen switched to a live feed. Jace was being unstrapped from the table by 2 guards, looking barely conscious. "He will be executed alongside the Queen," Kyle announced. "A symbol that we must purge this infection completely." Nix felt the words like a physical blow. They were going to kill him, not in some dark cell, but here, right in front of her, just to break her spirit. She looked at the council, at the smug satisfaction gleaming in Malicor's eyes. They really thought she was tamed. They really thought these chains of light could hold her. Nix closed her eyes. She reached out with her mind, not to her ship, but to the station itself. She felt the low hum of the gravity generators, the thrum of the electrical grid, and the secret whisper networks used by thousands of overlooked servants, the janitors, the technicians, all the little people listening in on hidden frequencies. Now, she sent the thought, a silent command that rippled through the station's hidden heart. "Burn it!" Back in the lab, Ren's hand trembled over the sedative dial. He looked at Jace, who gave him the slightest, almost imperceptible nod. Ren squeezed his eyes shut and spun the dial all the way to maximum. Alarms shrieked instantly. "Cardiac arrest!" a computerized voice screamed. "Initiating emergency protocol!" The durasteel clamps on Jace's wrists snapped open. Jace didn't even wait for his heart to stop. He launched himself off the table, snatching a surgical scalpel from a nearby tray. Thorn whirled around, his face a mask of fury. "What are you doing?" Jace plunged the scalpel deep into the power junction of the main server bank. A shower of sparks erupted across the room. "Making a withdrawal!" Jace yelled over the chaos. The lights in the lab flickered and died. The containment doors, sensing a catastrophic power failure, cycled open. Jace bolted. He was dizzy, his veins still full of sedatives, but adrenaline was one heck of a drug. He grabbed Ren by the collar of his lab coat and shoved him toward the emergency exit. "Run, kid! Go home!" Jace then ran in the opposite direction, toward the lift that led up to the spire. "I'll give you a plague of darkness." He overloaded the lighting grid for the entire spire. Back in the summit hall, the lights didn't just go out. They exploded, raining a shower of hot sparks down on the terrified delegates. Panic swept through the crowd like a wildfire. The live feed of the execution cut to static. General Kale whipped out his sidearm. "Emergency power, now!" From the deep shadows of the vaulted ceiling, a figure descended. Nix didn't fall. She drifted down, wrapped in a cloak made of living darkness, her eyes glowing like twin violet suns. She no longer looked like a prisoner. She looked like a goddess of vengeance. She landed softly on the platform, and the impact sent a shockwave that knocked the entire Shadow Council to their knees. "Nix!" he yelled. Guards immediately rushed him, 4 Union elites armed with plasma rifles. Jace dove behind a podium just as energy bolts tore up the floor where he'd been standing. He was pinned down. Nix saw him. She saw the guards lining up for the kill shot. She dropped Malicor. But she didn't attack the guards. She didn't summon a shield. She just ran. She threw herself across the stage, moving faster than the human eye could follow. They called her a monster, but the monster had just taken a salvo of plasma bolts for her human. Jace scrambled, dragging her limp form behind the massive council table for cover. His hands were immediately slick with her shimmering dark blood. "You fool!" Jace choked out, his hands pressing desperately against the smoking, cratered wounds on her back. You absolute beautiful fool. Why would you do that? Nyx coughed, and a spray of crimson misted her lips. Nyx groaned, her incredible healing ability fighting a losing battle against the catastrophic damage. I need, she gasped. I know, Jace said, not missing a beat. He tore the sleeve from his own tunic without a second thought. He pushed his bare wrist toward her mouth. Drink, he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. Nyx's eyes flickered from his face to the security cameras, which had switched to backup power and were broadcasting this intimate, forbidden moment to the entire galaxy. If I do this, she whispered, they'll all see. The galactic audience watched, utterly captivated. They saw the human, Jace, willingly giving his life force to the vampire queen, Nyx. They saw the incredible tenderness in his touch, the protective way he held her. They saw her clinging to him, not like a monster to its prey, but like a drowning soul to a life raft. A wave of power surged through Nyx. The gaping wounds on her back sealed themselves with breathtaking speed. The shadow serpents slammed the guards into the walls with bone-shattering force. They coiled around General Kale and Lord Malachor, yanking them into the air and holding them suspended in the center of the stage. Confess, she commanded, her voice resonating with power. I'll tell you nothing, you creature, Kale spat. Nyx just flicked a finger. The shadows tightened, and Kale choked. I'm not asking, Nyx said softly. We framed the queen to justify seizing power, he droned on. The nanites are designed to eliminate the poor, the dissenters, anyone not of pure blood. We wanted a clean galaxy. The confession echoed through the hall and across every broadcast in the system. When he was done, Nyx let them drop. They collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. She faced the stunned assembly of admirals and governors. You built your peace on a mountain of lies, she said, her voice like ice. We stand with the throne. Nyx glanced back at Jace. He was propped against the table, pale but grinning. See? He mouthed. Everybody loves an underdog. But the moment of triumph was cut short by a wailing siren, a deep, jarring alarm that vibrated through their bones. Failsafe protocol initiated, a calm computer voice announced. Plague dispersal network activated. Launch in T-5 minutes. He's not bluffing. The system is hardwired. There's no hacking it from here. Where is the central control node? Nyx demanded. The engineering core, Jace replied. But that's 20 levels down, and the whole station's security grid is going haywire. Nyx looked at the chaos erupting around them as delegates scrambled for the exits and soldiers started shouting orders. Jace was her navigator, calling out unseen threats and using his scanner to pinpoint structural weak points they could exploit. Left, Jace shouted. Gravity well! Nyx wrapped an arm around his waist and leaped, sailing over a shimmering distortion field that would have flattened them into paste. They landed hard in a service tunnel. Jace slumped against the wall, breathing heavily as he checked the charge on a stun pistol he'd picked up. The radiation levels around the dispersal unit. They'll be fatal for a human. Guess I'll hold my breath then, Jace shot back, reloading his pistol. Listen to me, Nyx. Your ancient magic can't interface with their modern tech. You need me to punch in the codes, and I need you to keep the killer robots off my 6. We're a team. You don't split up the team. End of story. Hand in hand, they stepped out into the storm, plunging deeper into the heart of the machine that was about to devour their world. Their descent into the engineering levels was like a journey down the throat of a dying god. The entire station was coming apart at the seams. In Sector 4, the structural integrity field gave out, making the floor ripple like the surface of a pond. The bulkhead buckled, and she held it back with nothing but a force of will scream, the muscles in her arms trembling as veins pulsed with starlight blue blood along her neck. Jace was a shadow right behind her, moving with the slick efficiency of a trained soldier. He scanned the swirling smoke for heat signatures, finding them the clearest path forward, his stun pistol popping off shots to take out automated defense turrets. But they couldn't just run. Down a hallway thick with poisonous fumes, they found a squad of Union medics pinned down by a haywire security droid. The machine was methodically blasting their cover to bits, and the medics were completely out of ammo. Nix's first thought was to leave them. Every second counted. The plague was only minutes from being released. "To the left!" Nix yelled, pointing at a service vent. "No!" Jace shouted back, grabbing her arm. He gestured toward the medics. "They're trapped! They're Union soldiers!" Nix's voice was a roar over the blaring klaxons. "They're the enemy!" "They're people!" Jace shot back. He didn't wait for her to agree. He broke from cover, sliding across the slick floor and ducking behind a toppled statue. He fired his pistol, deliberately drawing the droid's attention. Nix let out a curse in an ancient language, a sound so sharp it cracked the glass on a nearby viewport. But she followed him. She didn't head for the vent. She charged right at the droid. With one vicious swipe of her claws, she ripped its head clean off, and the machine died in a hiss of sparking wires. The Union medics just stared, their faces masks of pure terror. They weren't seeing a savior. They were seeing the monster from the propaganda posters, a nightmare cloaked in black armor. "Get to the escape pods," Jace ordered, helping a wounded nurse to her feet. "Level 9 is clear. Go now!" The medics were frozen for a second, their eyes darting between the human soldier and the creature who'd just saved them. Then, the lead medic gave a short, stunned nod of thanks, and they all scrambled to their feet and ran. It kept happening. A little further on, they pulled a vampire servant from beneath a collapsed support beam. Jace used his very last medical patch to seal a gaping chest wound on a Union Marine whose own commander had left him for dead. With every single life they saved, the strange bond between them grew stronger. Nix started seeing the station differently. It wasn't just a military target anymore. It was a ship full of souls. She could see the terror in their eyes, not of her, but of dying. And she understood that feeling all too well. Finally, they reached the massive blast doors of the core antechamber. Slumped against the control panel, clutching a wound in his side, was Admiral Holloway. He was one of the shadowy council members who had sat in judgment of them. One of the very men who had sentenced them both to death. Nix froze. Her shadowy aura flared, hardening into sharp spikes. "He's the one," she hissed, "who authorized the blockade." Holloway looked up, his face a sickly gray. He was holding a data pad in his shaking hand. "The code. It's alphanumeric," Holloway rasped. Nix hesitated. "Why?" "I saw," he wheezed. Holloway coughed, and a spray of blood stained his crisp white uniform. "I watched the security feed. You saved our people. You saved the medics." His voice was bitter. "The council, they left me here. They ran the second the alarms went off." He pushed the data pad across the floor toward them. "Override sequence Alpha 9. It'll get you inside the core. Please stop it. My daughter. She's on a colony world, right in the dispersal zone." Nix stared at the man who had wanted her dead, and all she could see was a father. Jace knelt and checked the Admiral's pulse. "He's going into shock." Jace pulled out a stimulant and injected it into the Admiral's neck. "Stay with us, Admiral," Jace said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "We'll get you help." Holloway's eyes were wet and confused. "Why?" "Because we're not them," Jace said simply. Jace snatched the datapad and typed in the code. With a deep groan, the blast doors slid open. The core chamber was an assault on the senses. In the middle of the massive spherical room, a giant column of pure energy pulsed like the station's own heart, and the engine that would spread the nanites. The air tasted like copper, and a deafening rhythmic thrumming vibrated deep in their bones. Floating all around the energy column were thousands of canisters. The plague. Enough death to wipe out the entire galaxy. Jace sprinted to the main console and plugged in Holloway's override. "I'm in," he yelled over the noise. "I can get to the deployment protocol." "Shut it down," Nix commanded, keeping her eyes fixed on the door, expecting reinforcements at any second. "I'm trying." Jace's fingers danced across the holographic display. "But, oh God. What is it?" "It's a dead man's switch," Jace said, his voice suddenly low.
The Council rigged it. If I hit the abort command, all that energy buildup has nowhere to go. It'll backlash. What does that mean, Jace? It means if we stop the plague, he said grimly, the core goes critical. The whole station detonates. Instant vaporization. Everyone on board dies. Us, the refugees, the soldiers, everyone. And if we do nothing? Nyx asked, her voice barely a whisper. Then the plague launches in 3 minutes, Jace said, and billions die. A heavy, awful silence fell between them. Nyx just stared at the swirling energy of the core. She looked down at her own hands, stained with the blood of centuries. Then there's no choice, she said softly, and walked toward the console. Jace, get to the escape pods. What? Jace spun around to face her. You can still make it, Nyx insisted. You know the maintenance shafts. If you run, right now, you can get clear of the blast. And you? I'll stay, Nyx said. I'll manually hold the triggers until the very last second to make sure the abort sequence goes through. No, Jace said, without a moment's hesitation. No way. It's the only way, Nyx shouted, her calm finally breaking. Look at me, Jace. Look at what I am. I'm a monster from a bygone era. My entire life is a river of red ink. If I can die today to save 1 billion lives, then that's a kind of justice. It's the only redemption I'll ever find. She put her hands on his shoulders and tried to push him toward the door. Go. Live your life. Find a quiet little planet, drink coffee, and forget you ever met me. Jace grabbed her wrists, but he didn't pull away. He stepped closer. I won't, he said. You stubborn fool. I'm not going to let you turn yourself into a martyr just because you hate yourself, Jace yelled, his voice thick with emotion. You think dying is the answer? Dying is the easy way out, Nyx. Living is the hard part. Living with what you've done and waking up every single day trying to make things right. That's what's brave. He pulled her in until their foreheads were touching. The galaxy doesn't need another dead monster, Nyx. It needs you. It needs the woman who took a rock to the face and didn't hit back. It needs the queen who saves her own enemies. Nyx started to tremble, and hot tears streamed down her face. I'm afraid, she whispered, her voice tiny in the roaring chamber. Jace, I'm so afraid. I know, Jace whispered back. Me too. He looked at her lips, then at the chaos erupting around them. He let go of her wrists and gently cupped her face in his hands. I love you, he said. Nyx let out a shaky breath. I love you too. They kissed, and it was nothing like a fairy tale. It was a kiss between two people standing on the brink of annihilation, fierce and salty with tears and sweat, desperate and all-consuming. Nyx's fingers tangled in Jace's hair, pulling him closer as if she could merge them into one being. Jace held her waist, trying to anchor her to the floor, to anchor her to life itself. For just one perfect moment, the screaming alarms faded away. The intense heat from the core seemed to vanish. There was only the feeling of his mouth on hers, the steady beat of his heart against her chest. They finally broke apart, gasping for air, their foreheads resting together again. There has to be another way, Jace breathed. Think, Jace, think. You're a medic. This is a disease. How do you treat a disease? He glanced at the console, at the nanite schematics displayed there. Wait a second, he said, pulling up the structural analysis of the nanites. They're programmable matter, he said, his eyes going wide with realization. They're designed to find specific genetic markers and destroy them. But the hardware is just a delivery system. He looked right at Nyx. Your blood. It's mutagenic. It rewrites DNA. That's how you healed me. That's how our bond works. Nyx wiped her mouth, trying to follow. What are you saying? If we introduce your blood into the source code, Jace said, talking faster and faster, if we use your unique biological signature as the new prime directive, we could reprogram the entire swarm. We don't have to destroy them, we can change them. Change them into what? Into healers, Jace said, a wild hope in his eyes. Instead of targeting life, we can tell them to target weapons. We can tell them to eat gunpowder, to dissolve nerve gas. to literally dismantle the machinery of war. Nix stared at the thousands of swirling tanks. Can we really do that? You'd have to interface with the core directly, Jace said. You'd have to let the system read your very essence. But Nix, the strain, it will try to digitize your consciousness. You could get lost in there. You could forget who you are. Nix looked at the deadly, beautiful light of the core. Then she looked back at Jace. I won't forget, she said with certainty. Not if you're with me. She walked to the interface node, slashed her palm open with one of her claws, and pressed her bleeding hand flat against the input panel. Jace immediately grabbed her other hand. He laced their fingers together tightly. I've got you, he promised. I'm your anchor. Nix closed her eyes, and the world dissolved into light. Jace was no longer standing in the core chamber. He was floating in a river of liquid starlight. He was inside Nix's mind. It was more vast and terrifying than he could have ever imagined. He saw whole centuries of memories flash past him like comets. He saw the burning of the Proxima colony, felt the scorching heat of the flames, and tasted the ash in the air. He felt the cold, soul-crushing loneliness of sitting on an obsidian throne for 200 years, surrounded by people who only feared her. He felt her hunger, a constant, gnawing emptiness that screamed for blood, and he felt her guilt. It was a physical thing, like a mountain of stone she carried on her back every single day. Imagine facing a godlike being whose mind is a storm of data, with every single bit representing a life she's taken. That was Jace's reality. He was just a man, fighting a nanite queen trying to turn him into ones and zeros. But while he didn't have centuries of power, he had something she'd lost: his humanity. So he fought back, not with force, but with memories. He pushed the scent of summer rain hitting a tin roof into her data stream. He showed her the taste of terrible coffee on a Tuesday morning, the feeling of putting a bandage on a child's scraped knee, and the simple joy of their smile. He showed her the first time he ever saw her, not as a monster, but as a broken angel standing in the smoke. Stay with me, his thoughts echoed through the storm. Please, just stay. Come back to the quiet mornings and bad coffee. In the heart of that digital hurricane, two currents collided. The cold, royal purple of Nix's violent history swirled with the warm, messy gold of Jace's simple life. And then, they merged. The machine's programming flickered. The word target. Life was overwritten. Target. Harm. Target. Weaponry. Target. Pain. The core programming turned from a furious red to a brilliant, blinding white. In the real world, Nix let out a scream of both agony and ecstasy as her very blood seemed to turn to light. Jace held on, his skin blistering from the raw energy, but he only squeezed her hand tighter. I am here, he yelled over the silent roar. I am right here with you. The explosion made no sound, just a wave of pure white particles erupting from the station. It washed over the fleets gathered in orbit and swept across the planet below. But it didn't kill. On the massive warships, targeting computers dissolved into fine dust. In the soldiers' hands, their rifles turned into sand. On the planet's surface, entire stockpiles of nerve gas were neutralized, becoming nothing more than harmless water. This wave of nanites was a tidal wave of enforced peace. It didn't destroy life, it devoured the very concept of war. Back in the chamber, the feedback loop shattered the control console, throwing Jace and Nix backward. They slammed against the far wall and slid to the floor, unconscious, their hands still locked together as the ceiling above them groaned. A huge slab of reinforced steel broke free, plummeting right for them. It never landed. A brilliant beam of tractor energy caught the massive chunk of debris, freezing it just feet above them. Through the smoke and dust, figures emerged. They weren't angels. They were just people, dirty, bleeding, and utterly exhausted.
It was the squad of medics Jace had risked his life to save. It was the servants Nyx had freed from their vampire masters. And leaning on a crutch, his face grim, was Admiral Halloway. "Get them out of here now!" Halloway barked. The medics rushed forward, carefully lifting Jace and Nyx onto floating stretchers. As they raced towards the escape shuttles, the entire station began to crumble behind them, a falling monument to an age of war that had just ended. 3 months later. The kitchen was small, sunny, and smelled like toast. Jace stood in front of an open refrigerator wearing only boxer shorts and a faded t-shirt that read, Outpost 4 Beta Bowling League. "Nyx!" he called out. From the living room, a voice that was somehow regal, melodic, and slightly annoyed all at once answered, "What is it, Jace?" "Why is your blood supply right next to the milk?" Jace asked, holding up a crimson bag. "We talked about this. Top shelf is for hemoglobin, middle shelf is for dairy and leftovers. This is a classic case of cross-contamination." Nyx floated into the kitchen. She was wearing a silk robe and hovering 3 inches off the floor, apparently because she couldn't be bothered to actually walk. "It keeps it colder," she stated, drifting over to the coffee maker. "And speaking of fluids, this bean water you brew is an insult to chemistry. It is ridiculously weak." "It's a medium roast," Jace defended, putting the blood bag on its proper shelf. "It has nuance. Not everything has to taste like iron and adrenaline," he added. Nyx poured herself a cup, made a face, but drank it anyway. She glanced at the clock on the wall. "We're going to be late," she said. "The Interspecies Council meeting is in an hour." Jace groaned, leaning his forehead against the cool refrigerator door. "Ugh, not another meeting. I hate politics. It's just a bunch of people arguing about trade tariffs in rooms with terrible air conditioning." "You're the one who insisted on war reparations and ethical constraints on technology," Nyx reminded him, floating closer. "You are the official liaison of reform. You have to go." "And you're the High Chancellor of the Transition," Jace countered. "So you have to go too." Nyx sighed. She finally let her feet touch the floor and wrapped her arms around his waist from behind, resting her chin on his shoulder. "Can't we just skip it?" she whispered. "We could take the ship, head for the outer rim, and hide out in an asteroid belt for a week." Jace turned around in her arms and smiled, gently brushing a strand of dark hair from her face. "And leave the entire galaxy unsupervised? They'd probably blow themselves up by lunchtime." He kissed her forehead. "Go put on your scary power suit. I'll go find my tie." The new council chamber was built on the planet's surface, right in the middle of a field that was once a giant crater, but was now blooming with blue wildflowers. The meeting was, as usual, total chaos. The old Union admirals were yelling about budget cuts. The vampire lords were hissing about territorial rights. Nyx sat at the head of the long table. She wore a suit of white and gray, no longer the black of an executioner. She just listened. She mediated. She didn't threaten to vaporize a single person. Jace sat to her right. He spent half the meeting translating complex military jargon into simple medical metaphors so the diplomats could actually understand, and the other half kicking Nyx under the table whenever she looked like she was about to incinerate a particularly annoying lobbyist. It was boring. It was frustrating. It was unbelievably hard work. And it was peace. That evening, back in their apartment, the lights were dimmed low. The gravity was turned down just a bit, simulating the gentle drift of a ship in deep space. Nyx put on a record, an ancient piece of vinyl Jace had found on a salvage run. Soft jazz filled the room. They danced, not saying a word, just moving together. Nyx rested her head on Jace's chest, listening to the steady, rhythmic thump of his heart. She tightened her arms around him. "You're so warm," she murmured. "You're so cold," Jace whispered back. "It's a good balance," she said, pulling back just enough to look at him. Her eyes were still that same deep, endless violet. "Do you remember the core?" she asked softly. "When our minds merged?" "Yeah," Jace said. "Kind of hard to forget." "I saw myself through your eyes," Nyx said. "I saw forgiveness. And I didn't think I deserved any of it. Jace stopped dancing and gently held her face in his hands. You earned it, Nyx. Every single day you wake up and choose not to be the queen of destruction, you earn it. Nyx leaned into his touch and closed her eyes. I'm still hungry sometimes, she confessed in a whisper. The darkness, it's still in there. I know, Jace said quietly, and I'm still afraid of loud noises. We're both works in progress, Nyx. He leaned down and kissed her. It was a slow, deliberate kiss, full of a quiet, steady warmth that felt like home. The final scene takes place on the observation deck of the newly rebuilt station. The main viewport was a massive wall of glass looking out into the infinite, glittering expanse of the cosmos. The stars were bright, no longer smudged by the shadows of warships. Nyx stood by the railing, a glass of synthetic red wine in her hand. Jace stood beside her, holding a simple mug of coffee. They watched the traffic drift by, huge freighters carrying grain, medical ships delivering vaccines, and passenger liners filled with families. It's strange, Nyx said, to look out into all that dark and not see a list of targets. It's called scenery, Jace replied with a small smile. You get used to it. Nyx chuckled. She gestured with her glass toward a particularly bright cluster of stars. You know, she said, a mischievous glint in her eyes, the old legends say I could drink those stars dry, that I could swallow the light of an entire system. I've heard that rumor, Jace nodded. I could still do it, you know, Nyx mused. Just one little sip. Jace took a slow sip of his coffee. He looked at her. This woman who could shatter a battle tank with a single thought, but who now spent her days arguing about zoning laws and her nights learning how to cook pasta. He set his mug down on the railing. He reached out and gently took her free hand in his. If you ever get that thirsty, he said softly, if you ever start to forget who you are or who you want to be, I'm right here. Nyx looked at him, and all the playfulness vanished from her face, replaced by a look of profound, terrifying vulnerability. You would treat the wounds? She whispered, echoing the first words she'd ever heard him say. Jace smiled. It was the smile of a man who had seen the absolute worst the universe had to offer and had somehow chosen to love it anyway. I'm just a human man, he said. Treating wounds is what I do. Nyx smiled back. It was a real, unguarded smile. The smile of a woman who had finally, truly put down her sword. She squeezed his hand. Then I suppose I'll just have to settle for the coffee, she said. They turned back to the window, standing shoulder to shoulder, watching the distant lights of the galaxy drift by. Two small sparks in the endless dark, burning together, bright and steady.